Welcome, deep thinkers and focused learners, to this explainer. If you've ever felt like a complete alien, basically hiding from grown adults with painted faces while massive global events are going down, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're validating that exact experience by breaking down the deeply fascinating psychology of the outsider.
Okay, let's dive into this. Right now, there is a tournament happening that commands the undivided attention of over 5 billion people. Just wrap your head around that for a second. 5 billion. Stadiums are literally packed to the absolute brim. Entire cities have basically stopped functioning, and grown adults are openly weeping in public squares over the results of a 90-minute game. Yet, amidst all this total global hysteria, you feel absolutely nothing, right? No urgency, no tribal pull whatsoever. You have zero desire to cancel your weekend plans, paint your face, or lose a single minute of sleep over a scoreline.
And inevitably, someone, maybe more than one person, has looked at you like there's something fundamentally wrong with your wiring. They always ask, how do you not care about the World Cup? Well, instead of just brushing that off, we are going to scientifically examine the psychology behind this exact detachment. Because honestly, your lack of interest is way more fascinating than the tournament itself.
So, part 1, the tribal brain, and why your circuitry didn't take the bait.
To truly understand this detachment, we gotta peel back the layers and look at the biological foundation of it all. You see, the human brain isn't really a rational machine. First and foremost, it's a survival machine. And this brings us to a concept known as social identity theory, which is the psychological need to define yourself through group membership to ensure your own survival. Think about it. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors lived and died based on one single, absolutely critical variable: belonging. Belong to the tribe, you eat, you sleep safely, you survive. Get cast out, well, you perish alone in the wilderness. And international sports brilliantly, almost perfectly hijack this ancient circuitry. Now, what's really interesting here is that when a national team takes the field, the brain doesn't just see 11 athletes kicking a ball around. No, it sees the tribe. It instantly activates this automatic us versus them mentality, and it releases the exact same survival-based neurochemicals that once helped your ancestors charge into battle together. But here is the secret that sports broadcasters will absolutely never tell you. This wiring, it is not universal. Psychologists have actually identified that a significant portion of the population possesses a trait called a high need for cognition. This is the psychological trait of actively resisting automatic social categorization in favor of evaluating and questioning. Individuals with this trait demand a highly personal, logical reason to invest their emotional energy into something. They need way more than just, sharing the same passport as the players on the screen. When we put the tribal brain up against the need for cognition, the contrast is super stark. The tribal brain defaults to an automatic group identity. It basically just absorbs the energy of the surrounding crowd like a sponge. But someone with a high need for cognition, they evaluate, they question, they actively ask, wait, why exactly should I care about this? So, if you're sitting there completely unbothered by a massive global tournament that has literally consumed everyone around you, I really want you to hear this loud and clear. It is absolutely not a deficiency. It is a higher cognitive threshold. Feeling detached isn't some glitch or a broken operating system. It's actually a profound cognitive strength. Your brain simply requires more substance to engage, which naturally guides us to part 2, the economy of attention and protecting your cognitive bandwidth. We're shifting gears now from biology to behavioral economics to discuss a really hard truth that sports media completely ignores. Human attention is a strictly finite resource. Let's talk about opportunity cost, meaning every choice you make is simultaneously a choice not to do 100 other things. Think about it. The World Cup is essentially a month-long emotional subscription. It actively asks you to care deeply about outcomes you literally cannot influence, involving people you have never even met, which takes massive cognitive bandwidth away from your own actual life, your goals, and your circumstances. And this brilliantly illustrates how high performers, we're talking entrepreneurs, artists, researchers, writers, how they allocate their emotional bandwidth. They selectively reserve 100% of their energy for their own game, their work, their goals, their relationships. The World Cup gets exactly 0%. And that's not because they're cold or lack passion, but because their energy is already perfectly and intentionally allocated. This actually aligns perfectly with a beautiful concept called autotelic experience. That is the state of being fully absorbed in an activity that is intrinsically meaningful to you. The legendary researcher Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying peak performance, and he found that maximum life satisfaction comes from chasing your own version of a championship.
So when you're fully absorbed in your own meaningful pursuits, the World Cup doesn't feel like something you're missing out on at all. It simply feels like an interruption. Let's move right along to part 3, the myth of social essentialism and defying social gravity. So we've looked at the biology and the economics. Now let's look at the sociological and philosophical layer, specifically that invisible social contract that gets so rigidly enforced every 4 years. This is known as social essentialism. It's the collective belief that certain behaviors or preferences are natural, universal, and frankly obligatory, simply because the majority practices them. There's this massive unspoken assumption that caring about the tournament is simply what humans do, and if you opt out, it somehow feels like you're opting out of humanity itself. But I want you to consider this hard truth for a second. Majority participation has never been evidence of universal truth. I mean, for most of human history, the majority of people believed things that were, quite frankly, catastrophically wrong. Majority participation is absolutely not the same as mandatory participation. What we're really witnessing here is social momentum versus objective importance. Viewed through this lens, the World Cup is perhaps the most spectacular example of mass social momentum in modern civilization. Billions of people synchronize emotionally, not because a football game is objectively the most important event happening on Earth right now, but because the immense social gravity makes opting out feel like this deliberate act of defiance. So the crucial point is that people who naturally resist this overwhelming social gravity, well, they share one thing, an incredibly powerful internal compass. They operate with a strong internal locus of control. Their identity is completely independent of external consensus, and their validation is entirely self-generated. They don't need the world to be excited about what they're doing, and they feel zero need to mirror the world's excitement either. And that brings us to part 4, psychological sovereignty, and what your detachment actually tells you. Let's bring all these layers together now to firmly and finally validate exactly what it means when you just effortlessly tune out all that noise. The reality of your detachment is deeply empowering. If you feel absolutely nothing when the tournament begins, I promise you it is not because you're asocial, cold, or culturally deficient. It's because your brain requires a highly meaningful reason to invest its energy. It's because your emotional bandwidth is already fully allocated to your own life, and you've developed an immunity to social essentialism. Basically, you choose rather than default. In a world actively designed to capture your attention at scale through massive spectacle, tribalism, and just straight-up fear of missing out, your ability to remain totally unmoved by something that doesn't serve your actual life is honestly magnificent. It is not indifference, it is psychological sovereignty. That is a profound, incredibly powerful state of self-mastery. Which leads us to the most mature, deliberate question a person can really ask. Not, why don't I care about this? But rather, what is actually worth caring about? The person who asks that question and then strategically builds their life around the honest answer, well, they aren't missing out on the championship at all. Because they're already playing in their own. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the defaults and keep building a life on your own terms.